Welcome to the Jason and Nikta Show. I'm
It's
Jason.
the Nikta and Jason show.
All right, let's do it again. Hi. Hi. Welcome to the Nikta and Jason Show. I'm Jason. Today we're going to go through requirements and handing over between product management and engineering. Nikta, tell us what's best to hand over requirements.
Well, I mean, I don't know that I can tell you what's best, Jason, because what I want to do is I really am so curious to get your perspective on this, because let me tell you, I have met so many different product managers who like to do this differently, and tech managers like to do it differently, and engineers like to receive it differently. So I'm so curious to know what you think, because in my experience, some product managers will write, let's say, a long honkin' spec, right? Multiple pages, super thorough, gives a nice overview, and then starts drilling it deeper and deeper into like specific requirements, has a bunch of like the business logic tied into it, has things like tracking and translation keys and whatever else you might need in the spec for depending on what you do. And I've always looked at these and I'm like, does anyone read this? Like, do engineers actually read it, or do they just like skip straight to the part that describes the very specific Jira ticket that they've been given to work on? And then if they skip to a very specific part, do they know that they're skipping to the right part and that they shouldn't also have the context that's somewhere else in the spec, etc.? So that's one way of handing off requirements, right? You can write a big spec. Another way of doing it is to like sit down with a tech manager or a tech lead or something and literally write out the requirements in individual Jira tickets, so that when an engineer has been given a Jira ticket, like it's right there, like what exactly is expected and how they would test it and QA it, etc. Another way of doing it is to skip all of that, which a lot of smaller teams will do, where it's just like after arriving at a shared understanding where everybody understands this is what the feature is supposed to do, this is how it's supposed to work. Okay, so we got to, we got to build the API, we have to build the, the UI for it, we have to do this, we have to do that, we have to make an update to this, whatever logic. And then it's like, okay, boom, 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 just create the tickets, and it's just like a title in the ticket and everyone just knows what to do because the whole team has been together as part of the discovery process, which refers back to our last episode around whether or not engineers should be involved in the whole design process, right? So there's a spectrum of like super defined and like very long documents and stuff to super like loosely defined, but there's like a shared understanding. Where on the spectrum do you fall? Like what's your preference in terms of how you receive what you need to code?
My preference. Good question. I'd probably say I lean to the more formal.
Okay, why is that?
Given the choice, because then whoever's handing this over to me has thought it through to a level of detail from which I can proceed. Right? With code, you need 100% specificity. Right? Every single tiny step stipulated, specified. What happens when this happens? What happens if the user accidentally puts the phone in water, right? Like, you want to go as broad as you can. And so if the product manager or whoever's managing this feature has thought through that, then it'll go a lot smoother. If my role is solely to turn it into code, then it goes so much more smoothly because there's a level of detail there that I can follow and turn into code.
So could I stop you right there before you go on, though? Because one thing that I get what you're saying. The question that always comes up for me is that, like, so I've written specs and they have turned out to be like super long honking specs and stuff as well. And like the nature of those, especially if it's a bigger project, a more complex project and stuff, is that the spec might change and it might actually keep changing as you talk through other use cases and edge cases and whatever that you hadn't thought of. Right. And so like, I don't know, every time I update it, like let's say in Confluence or something, like, and you might get an automated email that says like, hey, something changed. Like, do you go in and read it? Do you actually?
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm organized though.
You check those emails?
But it's kind of like, yes. So when you hand it over the first time, that's the starting point. if I have not been involved in the design process, I'm going to keep coming back and say, have you thought about this? We could reduce, the level of effort by 2 weeks if we changed just this little tiny thing. Oh yeah, great point. I'll update the spec. Great, I'll carry on with that, what I proposed, while you update the spec. So yes, the first time you deliver, that's when it starts. So it's expected that things will change, or it should be. There's no way you got it right when you wrote the requirements.
Yeah.
And that's just part of the gig. And then so that's why that's one way of doing it where it's very formal. I'd say that's when the product's pretty mature and you want to insert things. That works. When you don't really know what the requirements are, but you need to start, you kind of have a vague idea, then you can go less formal. And then presumably the engineers are going to be involved earlier and they're prototyping and they're doing things. That one where you just you have a shared understanding, that's probably the most presumptuous and the one most likely to lead to utter chaos and a badly run project, whatever.
That's so interesting that you think that, Jason, because to me, and there's literally books written on this topic, my friend, where it's what it used to be historically is that product managers would write a giant spec and it was a book and would hand it over, and that was utter chaos because
that was waterfall. Yeah. So
you read the lines in the spec and you interpret it as one thing and it's actually a different thing.
Sure. Yes. Okay. So a couple things there. One, shared understanding quickly becomes unshared. I can't remember anything I did a week ago on, the 8th week of March because we're quarantined. But, all the days blurred together. You can't really remember, maybe there was a decision after you wrote this terse, brief, hardly any words in it Jira ticket where there's one line in the title and that's it. There's no description. And I completely don't understand it. Hey, Nikta, what did you mean by this Jira ticket? Or I just, hey, we're growing. We hired a new guy. He has no understanding, or she.
Yeah.
No understanding because they haven't been there in all these awesome meetings that we've had to talk about this shared understanding. And so the best way is you have a spec. And if you are going to break down that spec into little tickets, you copy the spec text and put it in the ticket.
Oh, that's the worst because then something changes in the spec and you're like, okay, now I have to go find the ticket.
Yeah, then you got to go change. Yeah, that's too bad.
No, that sucks. No, not deal with it.
That's too bad. Deal with it.
There's got to be a better way, Jason. We've sent people to the moon. There's got to be a better way of working than to just copy paste between two different sources of truth. And then
when they sent people to the moon, I'm pretty sure they updated manuals with typewriters. Just, get over it. You have to do it in two different places. It's not that hard. What else are you doing?
What else?
You can do it. And
we clearly need an episode that walks through the day in the life of a product manager. So you realize that I don't just have the luxury of sitting around all day copy pasting things from specs into tickets. Also, is that even something the product manager should do, or is that something that a tech lead or a tech manager should do? Because I don't know how many individual tickets.
Well, someone should be doing that stuff. Run it. Someone who's guiding the sprints, or yes, it may not necessarily be the product manager. We spoke in episode 1 about what a product manager does, and it's overloaded. So maybe there's a project manager who does take that's all they do. I've got people skills, where they take the requirements and bring them to the engineers. Right? Maybe they're the ones that are doing the copying the text.
So then something changes in the spec, and then this poor fellow has to go in and update
and then ping the engineer, and then has to get all the shit from the engineer with, oh, why does this spec keep changing? But we covered that. It's natural to change. Okay, one more thing. So specs. There's this great post by long time ago called by Mark Pilgrim, who rage quit the internet in 2011. So probably you've never read him because you're a young millennial and you just watch videos. But he had this great post. It was super long ago. I think it was originally called Morons and Assholes. but it's like why? But in the Internet Archive, which I looked earlier today, it's labeled why specs are written. So there's two types of engineers: morons and assholes. Assholes will take your spec and go through it with a fine-tooth comb and implement exactly what's in your spec. And what's in your spec is a bunch of contradictions or a bunch of like typos. There's just things wrong in the spec. It's natural for that to happen. And through the course of the project, those logical errors will get sorted out. But the first, when an asshole does it, the first time it's in the software and like, this is terrible. But it turns out it's technically correct. It's exactly what you asked
for.
Yeah. So those are assholes. Now, they never get any better, and you have to constantly manage them. Although if you can maybe get them up front and to use their asshole power for good, they will make the spec more correct because they will think of through those logical things and tell you them as you're writing the spec. The other group is morons, and the morons will actually go and maybe like you have an example in your spec, like here's what this should look like. They just copy the example and implement that, and then they've missed all kinds of details. And like, what are you doing, you moron? This isn't what you did. And then maybe they'll go back and read the spec, and you're like, oh wow, this is really good. I didn't know I missed all this detail, and then they go and re-implement everything, and it's amazing. Or there's another kind of moron who will go back and read the spec and then turn into an asshole. Anyway, great post, and it said basically what good specs will lead to good software because you are kind of pushing back against these morons and assholes, and you just kind of have to do it. It's part of the human condition when you're dealing with computers on one end who are perfectly rational and humans who are not and can only be rational, I don't know, an hour a day. So great. I read that and I never forgot it. Morons and assholes. I've been both. I'm typically a moron because for various reasons. It's good to be a moron because sometimes things are just going to change. So it's not worth going through all the details. It depends a lot on circumstance, how organized the PM is, how rigorous everyone's been with the product so that they know all these details. Or there's another way of doing it where you just like, hey, let's make I don't know, a list of videos. That's every app, but whatever. Hey, let's just make a list of videos, and then you're there together and you've specified nothing, and the developer just goes off and says, oh cool, hey look, I made a list of videos. And then, oh yeah, it would be better if it was this, and it all just kind of grows up naturally, which I think is more agile. I don't know, pure agile.
So that version is totally more of like the shared understanding version. What you just described there is much more about like, hey guys, like what we really want is our users want to have a place where they can browse videos. And so what we want is have a new page that has a list of videos and like, okay, now we have a shared understanding, Jason, you go build it. And then now that I'm actually kind of seeing it, I'm like, hey, what would be great is if I could like maybe sort and filter this a little bit. And then we go back and forth. And it's not like I thought everything through in this giant spec and I handed it off to you, but like rather we kind of take those steps together. So I don't understand exactly where you fall on the spectrum. You have contradicted yourself. I am curious to know.
That's right. Welcome to programming.
I'm curious. Wait. Aren't you curious to know what our audience thinks? Aren't you curious to know? I want to know.
Only if they click subscribe. Click subscribe.
Click subscribe. Leave in the comments below. How do you prefer, if you're an engineer, to receive requirements from product managers? And if you're a product manager or a designer or somebody else, how do you prefer to hand those things off? What's your preference on working together to build great software? And Jason, I think we're out of time, so we probably have to leave it at that.
Okay.
But yeah, depending on what you guys say in the comments, maybe we do a part 2 to this because I think there's a lot more we could dig into, huh?
That sounds great.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.